Hello, students. When we were discussing literary terms, we had talked a little about war poetry, and we had a reference to poets like Wilfred Owen, Sassoon, and Edward Blunden and Brooke. Today, we are taking up the poem Sonnet, a sonnet, The Soldier by Rupert Brooke, which has been prescribed in our syllabus. Let's have a quick look at Rupert Brooke's biography. He was an English poet and who is ideally known for his war sonnets, which were written during the First World War, especially The Soldier. And he's remembered mainly as a war poet because he is closely identified with the ideas and thoughts which are related to the commencement of the First World War. He was also known for his boyish good looks, which were said to have prompted the Irish poet W.B. Yeats to describe him as the handsomest young man in England. And he was educated at Rugby at Cambridge. He used to write both poetry and prose. He also wrote some criticism and drama. He was a man of serious political and social interest, but his association with the First World War and early death resulted in excessive kind of a praise of his war poetry. Brooke made friends among the Bloomsbury group of writers, some of whom admired his talent, while others were more impressed by his good looks. He also belonged to another literary group known as the Georgian Poets and was one of the most important of the Dymock poets, associated with Gloucestershire village of Dymock, where he spent some time before the war. Now, this group included both Robert Frost and Edward Thomas. He also lived at the Old Vicarage, Grantchester, which stimulated one of his best known poems, named after the house, written with homesickness while in Berlin in 1912. Brooks suffered a severe emotional crisis in 1912 caused by sexual confusion, and Brooks' paranoia that little Stratbury had schemed to destroy his relationship with Cox by encouraging her to see Henry Lamb precipitated his break with his Bloomsbury group friends and played a part of his nervous collapse and subsequent rehabilitation trips to Germany. Part of his repercussion, Brooke toured the United States and Canada to write travel diaries. He took the long way home, sailing across the Pacific and staying some months in the South Seas. And much later, it was revealed that he had fathered a daughter with a Tahitian woman named, and many more were in love with him. Brooke was romantically involved with the artist Gardner and actress Nesbit, and was engaged to Oliver, whom he met when she was aged 15. This was a little about his biography. He was enlisted at the outbreak of war in August 14, and he came to gain public attention as a war poet. His most famous collection of poetry containing five sonnets, 1914, and other poems was first published in May 1915. He accomplished poetry, gained many enthusiasts and followers, and he was taken up by Edward Marsh, who brought him the attention of Winston Churchill, the First Lord of the Admiralty. The beginning of 20th century witnessed a sort of disillusionment with imperialism, and there was a growing tendency among liberal thinkers to denounce it. This was also a period of low self esteem on the part of the Britishers because the war broke out in 1914, and many people welcomed it as a necessary crisis which would reactivate and sort of remotivate the national life and provide the direction to it. This was not a very sustainable kind of a view because the painful side of the war soon came to be forgotten. And we have writers depicting this painful and grief and sorrow of the war. And we have already mentioned the names of Owen, Sassoon, Blanton, and Brooke, etc. The Soldier is one of the five sonnets which Rupert Brooke has written and were published as the 1914 sonnets. It is commented upon by Dean Inge, who viewed it as the enthusiasm of a pure and elevated patriotism, and it is in the tradition of other patriotic poems like Tennyson's Blow Wiggle Blow and The Charge of the Light Brigade, and the sonnet. is remembered as a beautiful description of war. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. There shall be in that rich earth a richer dust concealed, a dust whom England bore, shaped and made aware, gave once her flowers to love, her ways to roam. A body of England's breathing English air, washed by the rivers, blessed by the sons of home. And think, this heart, all evil shed away, a pulse in the eternal mind, no less, gives somewhere back the thoughts by England given. Her sights and sounds, dreams happy as her day, and laughter learnt of friends and gentleness, in hearts at peace under an English heaven. So, this is the poem, Soldier. Brooke says that if I die in the war, I want to be remembered in a particular way. Think of how far the far off land on which I die will have a small piece of England forever. That earth will be enriched by my dead body because my body is made from dirt born in England. England created me and gave me consciousness, gave me her blooming plants to fall in love with, and gave me my sense of freedom. He further says that my body belongs to England. He has always breathed English air. England's rivers cleansed me, and I was blessed by England's sun. He also says that consider the way in which my soul through death will be made pure. My consciousness will return to the immortal consciousness like a beating pulse and return the beautiful thoughts that England gave me. I'll return the sights and sounds of my home country to be beautiful dreams that were as happy as England's daytime, and to the laughter shared with English friends. I'll return England's gentleness, which lives in the English minds that are at peace under the English sky. By English sky, he means the English heaven, where he says, I'll be at peace too when I die. This poem, a sonnet, explores the bond between a patriotic British soldier and his homeland. Through his soldier's passionate discussion of his relationship to England, the poem implies that people are formed by their home environment and culture, and that their country is something worth defending with their life. Indeed, the soldier sees himself as owing to his own identity and happiness to England, and accordingly is willing to sacrifice his life for the greater good of his nation. This is, then, a deeply patriotic poem, implicitly arguing that nations have their own specific character and values, and that England's are specially worthy of praise. Though most people might fear death, particularly of the violent kind that war can bring, the speaker of the soldier is prepared to die because he believes how he would be doing it for his beloved homelands. The speaker thus doesn't want people to grieve his death. He sees that potential death in some foreign land as a way of making a small piece of the world forever England. That's because he sees himself as an embodiment of his nation. Accordingly, dying somewhere foreign leaves a small part of the home nation in that foreign land. Nationhood is portrayed as something that is inseparable from a person's identity even after and when they die. The poet, the speaker, feels he owes his identity itself primarily to his country. It was the personified England that bore and shaped him, nourished him with sun, ironically given the often gloomy weather, and air, and cleansed him with water. Much of the sonnet's octave, the 8 line stanza, is devoted to creating a sense of England as a pastoral, idyllic, and even Eden like place. The poem's imagery of rivers, flowers, earth, air, and sun is part of an attempt to transform nationhood from a human concept to something more fundamental and natural, all the while tied to England specifically, as though the land is infused with the character of its people and vice versa. In fact, the idea of nationhood is so deeply embedded in who people are, and this is what the poem argues, that it extends beyond the earthly realm. Even the heaven that the speaker hopes to go is specifically an English heaven. In part, that's because the speaker's idea of heaven is a projection of how he sees England, apart from being a kind of natural and nurturing mother. England is already a kind of heaven. Indeed, the poem presents England and heaven as most interchangeable, as described above. Everything about England is supposedly pure and nourishing, and the speaker's consciousness after he dies will return to an eternal mind which will still be forever linked to the place that created it. Nothing in the poem. Then the horrors of the war. Indeed, there is a very little of the realities of war at all, and this perhaps explains why the poem has inspired strong reactions ever since its publication. It was immensely popular when it was published in 1914, but this was before the true horrors of the First World War and had been fully revealed, a time when the war was still tinged with an air of excitement, anticipation, and of course, patriotism. In the decades that followed, some critics saw Brooks' poetry as woefully naive and sentimental. Either way, the poem is a powerful expression of patriotic desire and belief in the bond between people and their homeland. Written with 14 lines in a Petrarchan Italian form of sonnet, the poem is divided into an opening octet and then followed by a concluding sestet. As far as rhyme scheme is concerned, the octave is rhymed after the Shakespearean Elizabethan style, that is ABAB CD form, while the sestet follows the Petrarchan Italian form EFG form. The volta, the shift or the point of dramatic change, occurs after the fourth line, where Brooke goes from describing the death of the soldier to his life accomplishments, winning of the First World War in 1914, as part of a series of sonnets written by Rupert Brooke. He himself predominantly died the year before The Soldier was published. The Soldier, being the conclusion and the finale to his war sonnet series, deals with the death and accomplishments of a soldier. The sonnet encompasses the memoirs of a deceased soldier who declares his patriotism to his homeland by declaring that his sacrifice will be the eternal ownership of England of the small portion of land where his body is buried. So the poem appears to follow not the normal purpose of Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. It does not truly go into detail about a predicament or resolution because it's customary with this form. Rather, the atmosphere remains constantly in the blissful state of the English soldier.